Okay, so welcome to Eden Smith's Behind the Data podcast. This will be the very first podcast of season one, and the topic which we'll be covering in this season will be about building sustainable data teams. My name is Jez Clark. I'm one of the co-founders of Eden Smith Group. We specialise in data analytics staffing and consulting. And throughout this season, I'll be inviting various data leaders who have built teams in the past. I'd like them to share their experiences, and hopefully you'll learn a thing or two, and we can share what we learn to be better at our jobs moving forward. So for this particular podcast, I'm very happy to be introducing Nicholas Deveney, who is the Global Head of Consulting for Eden Smith Group. Welcome, Nick. How are you?
I'm good, thanks, Jez, and thanks for having me in this first episode. So
you're very welcome. You're very welcome. Obviously, we've known each other for a very long time, but actually what I find really interesting about this, and with you kicking this off, is that I've personally watched your journey within the data space, and obviously have a number of questions. I think you've been on a very big learning curve, an interesting one, and you've obviously been part of the group. You've watched our business grow, and you've also grown your own consulting business within the group and delivered multiple projects and obviously built your own team. So I think there's a lot of people out there that will be able to learn something from you, especially being a bright young individual that you are. And so tell us, Nick, how did you initially get into the data industry?
Yeah, I suppose my background, even from uni, was always I took a sales route. I was going down, talking to people and selling products into various customers, both consumers and then B2B. Eventually, I, as many people do, fell into recruitment. Kind of wasn't expecting it. Kind of got a role in recruitment where obviously I met yourself and Matt. And recruitment was an interesting one for me because it's about sales and it's about people. But realistically, in order to be, an effective recruiter and really support and add value to the customers that you're working with, you have to get to understand and know the technologies or the environments and industries that you're working with, right? There's a reason why most of the successful recruitment businesses are niche recruitment businesses. They have an understanding of the requirements. They have an understanding of what's needed in order to make success. And I feel for me that was something I really held on to and started to become very actively involved in the industries I was working in. Back then, we were looking at the IT industry, telecommunications. It was quite data focused still back then, all around kind of RF analysis and RF planning and connectivity. So for me, I took a personal interest and got really invested in how things work, and what problems there were, and the kind of evolution of technology, and take from there. I think at the time there was obviously a kind of a drive to want to do things differently. Had an opportunity to do that within the business I was working in, to kind of take a different approach to the traditional ways of recruitment working. But my first instant kind of insert into data was then with Eden Smith being a data recruitment specialist, a niche specialist in that space. When I joined, I was obviously then involved in a completely different industry, a new industry, one that was growing, one that was still learning, and I brought over that kind of, I suppose, thinking about how to learn, how to understand, and how to get real in-depth knowledge of the businesses I was trying to support. That actually lit a passion inside me that not any industry had. I think it was, well, maybe it's because of the growth curve we were going through in the data industry at the time. 7 years ago, it's still on that growth curve, but I think it lit a passion in me that made me see things very differently. I'd always done kind of critical thinking, logical thinking as extracurricular back in school. So that kind of problem solving and logical approach to problem solving was a bit of a passion to me. So started to self-learn do personal projects, and it kind of exploded from there.
Yeah, that's really interesting. I think you and I will both agree that to be an effective recruiter in any space, you do have to have a good understanding of the topic and the functions of the people that you're placing into businesses. And I can remember that pivotal moment when I think you came in one Monday morning and said that you've been playing around with some SQL coding and Python development, which was quite not a shock, but it certainly, I think, outlined that there was a different or a more deeper interest in the data industry and how it was working. Would you say that that was the pivotal moment in your career where there was a step change for you to be where you are today?
Yeah, I think, there was a few, and I was lucky enough to be at some of the early stages of the modern data kind of change and this revolution going on Big Data London's kind of terminology there. I was lucky enough to be involved at a time when there was lots of hype and lots of change and lots of growth in the industry, and I think that some of the lessons and some of the people that we got to interact with through our network, some of the big leaders in today's world taught me a lot about how to think differently, how to take data concepts and apply them, and slowly and surely I started seeing this kind of these rules being applied to our industry, to recruitment, to our business, and I started to question the way we were doing things more and more, and thought, well, 1 minute, if we can understand our data, we can change the ways we work. So I don't think it was at that point, I don't think it was I foresaw a career in data. I foresaw data as a way to solve the business problems that we were facing, and to drive value. And that self-learning and that drive then said pivotal in kind of having a career in data. But it's quite interesting because as we've kind of moved up that ladder from hands-on technical to thinking about advising and supporting data leaders in what to do and how they approach things, it comes back down to culture, and it comes down to people and relationships, and therefore that recruitment HR piece, all of the knowledge from that side comes into play. But secondly, we've come into a point where it's back to business value. We've had this change of being data driven, being a data driven organization and stuff like this, but we've pulled it back to business value. Business value created through data products, which for me comes back down to selling a product, looking at the problem of how we solve the problem, but how do we use data within the business and create a culture that solves those problems. So I think that data point into our business was a pivotal change for me.
And also, I think, and I'll ask you another question in a second, but a pivotal moment in your career where you started to understand the value within our business, which is perhaps obviously why you've been in a delivery role, you've been in an advisory role in the last 3 or 4 years, but you've also now, I think where we're at now, whereas you're head of group data solutions for Eden Smith. Now you're doing it internally for our business to make sure that we're really we're working as a data-driven company as well. Now, obviously, I would imagine there've been some obstacles throughout that transition. Certainly from becoming, from being a recruitment individual in data science to where you are today. What were the biggest challenges and obstacles from a career path change did you experience?
I think there's a couple on the way. I think the first one is changing your personal mindset around how you look at problems, how you look at approach things. I think yes, there's obviously a technical learning curve, but I think there's plenty of support and options and programs out there, and that's something that just takes time. I think one of the obstacles is finding the right time. I mean, I was again, I count myself quite lucky in that Eden Smith, seeing that change in me, kind of gave me some opportunities to explore that and to develop that. Whether that be taking a Friday or taking some afternoons to work on those internal projects or my personal projects. It's finding the time to actually practice there. I think the other obstacle comes with, or the biggest obstacle then comes with experience, and which you can sort of only gain. You can't only gain it over time, but because you gain it through doing, and you gain it through experiencing different experiences, right? You can create those experiences quickly and quite effectively, right? If I play one game of chess every week, it's not about the amount of time it takes that I've been playing chess for. I could play 30 games of chess today and gain experiences through that playing. So when I talk about experience, I'm not talking about time in the industry. I'm
Right.
talking more about what you see, what challenges and scenarios you go through, and
Yeah.
how you deal with them. And I think some of that is the biggest obstacle, because in the earlier part of my career, I hadn't seen or experienced some of the challenges that people in the industry for years had.
Mm.
You know, so I think gaining those experiences there and having the confidence to use the network around us to know how to solve them, to then experience them yourself.
Yeah. I think that's really, really good advice, and excellent self-awareness there of your transition. I mean, if you think about it, there are a lot of people at the moment that are either already in a technical role or they're in a business focused role, and they're actually trying to get into the data industry. I guess, the listeners would like to understand, what do you think are those core skills that you have as an individual, the ones that maybe you didn't have when you started to transition, which are most important for someone to be successful in our industry?
I think the particularly in the early stages, and I don't think something you ever lose, but the power of questioning, curiosity is probably the biggest skill. Now, I know, in our kind of history and development over the years, there's been times when I've perhaps maybe pushed those a bit too far, and between us, we've got frustrated when I just, well, why do we need to do that? What's it we're trying to achieve? Well, how we'll go about that, and delving, taking that high level understanding of the objective, but being able to kind of get behind what someone's telling you or instructing you, and understand what's really been trying to be achieved. Because once you understand that, you can then kind of work backwards to, okay, how are we going to do this and drive through this? So that curiosity behind what we're trying to do, or how we're trying to achieve something, or trying to go beyond the service level. In critical thinking, it's kind of similar to basically logistic fallacies, right? So someone can put an example out there, or a bit of data out there, or a bit of information out there, and if you take it at surface level, you could make assumptions, or kind of agree on something that actually, when you look at the result of it, isn't true.
Yeah.
So a really common example of this is people, quite easily, A equals B. So if A equals B, it's kind of subliminally implied that B equals A, but that's not the case, right?
Right.
If you say, a cat is an animal, just a cat walking past the screen, a cat is an animal, it doesn't mean that all animals are cats.
Yeah. Well, let's hope not.
Yeah, exactly. Do you know what I mean? So I think it's that questioning, that critical thinking, and so critical and logistical thinking, I think, are the two key skills you need to develop and grow, particularly when you first come into the industry. Problem solving, those kind of soft skills. I think as you develop and as you grow in the industry, I think for today we need to start thinking about, and I kind of hate the terminology, and I don't know how far it will come through, but I do think there is a new role for a data ethicist. So I think that we need to start thinking a lot more ethically about what we're doing, how we're using data, and where we're using it for. We've talked about data governance for many years, and we've talked about, sharing of information, the right consent, and the right, GDPR and all this kind of stuff. But I think there's a responsibility for data professionals to question and to guide and advise the businesses we work with on controlling, managing, supporting data in an ethical and sustainable way.
Yeah, which is a massive thing at the moment anyway, as we know. Regulation is coming around ESG, carbon footprint for businesses, all of that sort of stuff, and sort of a heavy element of governance involved in it. Just wanted to move on a little bit, actually, because as part of your career, You've built the consulting business up for Eden Smith Group. And of course, you know, that core topic that we're getting to around building a sustainable data team. You've had to build your own team within the Eden Smith Group. And obviously, I think there's a talent strategy that you have to have in your mind before you go out to do this sort of thing. What is your approach to building a data team, and would you say it's the best approach, or would you say you would have done things differently? So how have you approached it, building the team?
I don't think would I have done things differently, and is it the best approach? I don't think there's the right answer to either of those questions. I think that the strategy you take depends on the resources, the culture, the environment, the objectives that you have in any given situation. You know, don't get me wrong, there are some businesses out there, some consultancies out there that go get large investment and they can go and hire, you know, a team of data engineers, a team of data scientists, a data architects, and fill a team of 10 to 12 people as a minimum, you know, small numbers still, but all on you know, market leading salaries. Not every business, in particularly, you know, we see this through the recruitment world, not every business is able to do that. They don't have the budget, they don't have the internal capabilities, they don't have the resources, you know, they don't have the environment to support that from a data perspective. So I think the strategy for me is what is the right fit for the organization at this time, and how do we stretch or push that boundary enough to create progress and create innovation. So, you know, I feel that if you're going to do that, you need to look at, well, what internal skills do we have? What external power do we have to bring in new skills? And then how do we then balance that with investment in short-term, mid-term, and long-term development? So, you know, it's no good. And we've supported many businesses in this pathway, but you know, it's no good going into a very traditional business that's got a, you know, traditional SQL development team with traditional, you know, SSRS reporting, and immediately dropping in a, you know, modern data lake that uses Python. You know, on Python. There's no point in doing that, because you're then creating a massive skills gap between the individuals that are already there and the skills that are needed to do that. So it has to be a phased kind of approach of, well, let's upskill the individuals that are there. They've got the business knowledge, they've got the data skills, and they probably have, you know, some interest in, you know, some experience in trying out these modern tools. So there's a growth path that you need to take your existing team on. You then have a investment choice of whether you bring in a consultancy to adopt and drive, you know, immediate change to get things moving and deliver value, or you use contractors over a longer period of time to fill in the skills gap that you can then learn and grow. And I think for me, the strategy of our consultancy has always been about knowledge transfer and information sharing, you know, and actually kind of combined collaboration because of that upskilling aspect.
So I like that. I like it a lot. And, you know, if we talk about components of a talent strategy, what I'm hearing, Nick, is that you would say internal mobility and training are probably two of the main or most important components before you go out to market to build a team, because like you say, there are a lot of businesses out there not quite ready to adopt new set of skills that come in. And also, what is your view around my view would be that internal training and internal mobility help with retention and keep existing teams motivated, right? Would you agree with that?
I agree with the point you said at the end, but I disagree with the fact that you should look at mobility and internal upskilling first. I don't think there's a logical linear approach to your talent strategy. Yeah, it can't be, because it will never keep up and it will never work. You'll train some people and they'll have them new skills and they'll leave and go somewhere else. You know, you'll train some people, but a demand from the business comes in and their training's doesn't kind of grow as much as you expect them to in a period, or actually demand comes in the business and you haven't got the skills to deliver, right? So again, it's very environmental and situational. I think that your talent strategy, yes, internal mobility and upskilling is a big block that we don't spend enough time on in businesses. When we talk about change transformation, we often think about, bringing in new resources, bringing in consultancies, bringing in, change, that kind of change. I feel sometimes that that's because as humans, we don't like change, right? We're very change adverse. And I feel that when you initially talk about these projects, you get a lot of protection. People want their job security. They don't really want things to change. They don't sometimes understand the change, and therefore they will always get a group of people in an organization when you try to make a shift like that are adverse against that change. There will be people that find it interesting and find it exciting, and it will improve their retention from that perspective. But during that journey, still there'd be moments of doubt, moments of worry, right? So I think that there needs to be a multifaceted approach to how you build your talent strategy. How do we upskill and train these people? Part of that upskilling could be having contractors or a consultancy in to work alongside them. We spent a lot of time to transfer knowledge. Yeah. So we've done a lot of time where we've had, we've been doing peer-to-peer programming like you do in the software development world, building out pipelines, building out reports, building out stuff with those. We've built guidelines, we've built best practices and processes. Now they're not going to work for every company in every way, but certainly you're training and transferring the knowledge of the basic concepts. Now they might not get to where you perhaps put in the beginning where your objective is. It might be they only make halfway and they have something between what they had before and what they've got now, and that's fine, that's acceptable, but I do think it needs to be, it's not linear, it needs to be modular.
So getting all the parts of the components of the talent strategy working at the same time is much more effective than sort of going 1 to 10, as that it would be your view. Now, when you've got a team in place, and especially within a market where it's tough to hire staff, right? There's a skill shortage. We know that across multiple different parts of the data landscape. When you've got your team in place, what are you doing to make sure that they're continually motivated, and what strategies do you employ to retain them? Because we don't want to go out to market to recruit new people. What we want to do is keep the people that we got to start with. Let's be honest, as best as we can. Those that are effective and doing a good job. What do you do to do that?
Yeah, look, I think this is not a data specific problem. It's a general HR workforce problem, and it's been going cyclical for years now, right? So I think that there are many strategies out there that people look at, and the first is actually open communication. Speaking to the team members, not from a management leadership perspective, from a colleague perspective, about how they're feeling, what their interests are, where their ideas are, and making sure they're listened to. That for me is the first one. I try to instill a lot of autonomy in my team, so they can decide in their own way how they do things and what their approaches are, as long as it's part of certain frameworks and certain guidelines. In charge of their own time based on deadlines they know they've got to meet. We're no longer 9 to 5, and the work from home and flexible working has completely shifted that, right? We know that people don't work best 9 to 5. Lots of practices out there, so give them flexibility in meeting objectives that way. The other part is like I said, personal interest and personal projects. One of my consultants, he quite often, particularly if sometimes it's on his holidays and I don't want him to, but certainly they come back one day and say, I've built a report off of the price increase of my Tesco shop over the last 6 months because I've been keeping on my receipts.
It sounds quite handy, Nick.
But there's an element around personal projects, and I think and it's a little bit different, I suppose, for other business, but internal, external projects. So I often, when we're talking to the students, part of our nurture program, say to them, there is untold data out there. There is online available, or you can create data yourself. There's no shortage of data available in order for you to practice and learn and experience your skills.
Very good point.
So I think that it's about giving the team time to do that. And that does mean carving out time from our schedules. It's a very hard thing to do, in that especially in big demanding businesses and where you've got an enterprise with lots of backlog and stuff like this, I think it's very hard to say, do you know what, we're going to take an hour, 3 hours out of the day, every Friday or every Wednesday, whatever it may be, we're going to take 3 hours a day, and you can work on personal projects or other projects that are not part of the general portfolio during that time. It's hard to achieve, and perhaps puts other things back on the back burner a little bit. But I think sometimes the things they experience and the things that they try and test will mean that they actually end up doing stuff faster and quicker and easier, and solving problems sooner and more confidently in the future.
And your way of communicating with the team, and I certainly like the piece around autonomy, I think allows people to have that freedom. They feel engaged from it, they feel trusted, which is a cultural thing, I think, which is very important.
I've been pushing Agile and Scrum, like most people, for a very long time. I think it's very difficult to achieve when you don't have a singular product that you are developing and moving on. Tech software businesses, pure product businesses, like the Apples of this world, they have a team that are focused on a product with a product owner, and they drive through. When in most modern businesses, enterprises, we end up with multi projects going on at one time, and that team have to deal with those projects and the prioritization of them. So I've been in stand-ups and kick-off meetings and stuff like that have lasted hours, and there's too many people on them, and we're covering off lots of different topics. And I think that there's places where we can make time efficiencies, and I think that it's not to say that we don't follow up and we don't track and we don't communicate about what's being done, what's being blocked, and where we are on achievements. But I do think there is a element of autonomy around how we approach things and how we allow people to work in their own space. And Scrum talks about this quite often, right? If you take your car to an experienced mechanic, they could probably do, change the tire. Or if a Formula One team can change tires quicker than you can change a tire yourself, right? It's that one job, the complexity of a job is not necessarily the same for different individuals. So you can't say this should take you a day, and therefore I expect it to be done in a day. And it may be that other influences that come into that. They might get you might get an M1 incident happen, which takes off half the day, and therefore it's not in that timeline. So I think it's more about communicating and letting them inform you about how they can achieve the objectives you set. But that means you've got to be clear on the objectives and clear on the kind of timelines that you need objectives to be completed in a kind of a major way rather than a micro way.
That makes perfect sense. So moving on slightly from you've got the team in place, kind of getting a good feel of how you motivate your team and you retain the team. Would you say that you're a champion of employee training and development? And if so, are there any tools that you could recommend or use which you found most effective?
Yeah, look, learning, development, training is a key factor. I don't think anyone's going to deny that. I think that if I look at my growth, like we spoke, the way how I got here, it was self-learning. It was using online resources, YouTube videos, podcasts, Udemy courses, those courses that seem forever on sale for $10.99 or whatever it is and it ends tonight, but it's got the same sale tomorrow. Those kind of courses that are available. Yes, they're not as sometimes as hands-on and sometimes as I suppose accredited. They're not necessarily accredited, right? To get accredited stuff, you're paying lots of money out, and I think that sometimes people see that as a barrier and an entry to certain roles, and not just in data, in other careers as well. you don't necessarily, like I said, if we could bring it back to, you don't necessarily have to have the certification. You need to start building your experiences. You need to know, like, the frustrations of when you bring in a data set and it's got dirty data. Someone's used the wrong format for dating for a date, and it messes up your results. You need to know that when you're trying to build a report and the relationship isn't right and it's messing up your kind of visuals, and your visuals aren't linking correctly. Like, you need to experience these things that happen in a day-to-day business environment so you can work out ways to how you can handle them, and this is where you go for support, so that when it comes to it in a live critical project inside a business, you're not kind of sat back scared to talk to anyone, or spending days on end trying to resolve that issue. So I think that's why training development's important. I think, like I said, those non-accredited courses are a great starting point. I think accreditation does need to be brought in for standardization, for people to kind of understand levels of competence. But that doesn't mean that your training development life cycle has to be purely around those certifications.
So is it fair to say then that the training, the personal training or personal development, and some of those things that you mentioned, like Udemy and online YouTube and all that sort of stuff, would in effect be if you were talking to the next generation of data talent, would typically be one of the tips that you would give?
Yeah, look, I would say, and I've kind of, if you thread some of these parts together, you find something you're personally interested in. Go find some data about that particular interest. Build out some questions that people might ask or you might be interested in on that data. Use some of the free tools and free credits that are available out there use your own machine with so it's not actually any cost involved in it, and take some of those those YouTubes and Udemy courses and starting points to build your own personal portfolio. That's not just for entry people into this environment. You'll always, even at you've been in a business for years that uses certain technology and a certain thing, right? As businesses, even though we can be agile and we can adapt, we're not changing our technical landscape and our architecture every couple of months, right? And there's technologies that are coming out, and there's advancements and changes that are coming out that you might not always get the chance to explore and experience inside your business.
Right.
So put yourself in a different situation, put yourself in a different experience that will allow you to drive and push forward, right? I think when you look at the investment world and that kind of side, people say all the time, oh, I don't really invest in stuff that I don't know about. I have to at least read, get that baseline across other sectors, across multiple sectors, to give me knowledge in knowing what to invest in. Yeah, it's the same in the data world. Why, if you're in the finance industry doing data and stuff like that, why can't you do a personal project in the marketing industry and understand how marketing analytics applies, in that world, and what can you learn from that to then bring into your world, or to even advance in different areas. Get a better understanding of lots of different things that are moving on. I suppose if you think about strategies, where it's the T plan, right? So you've got your long-term ongoing progressive, but spikes that dip into these certain other areas, and that they'll support and help the progression you make.
Well, very interesting and really good advice there. Interesting, you mentioned different functions, and also you've mentioned industry there. And as we know, within the data world, data affects every single type of industry anyway, globally. What do you think's the next big trend that we're expecting in our field of data analytics?
There's a couple of different things going on that I think are driving the future. Obviously, we've ChatGPT at the moment is flying. AI is becoming massive. How do we get that in how do we get that into our businesses? For a lot of people, it is already there. I don't necessarily think that's a long-term trend at the moment. I think that's something that's going to be understood, implemented within the next couple of years. And so I think if you look at things like obviously you've got the metaverse and augmented realities. I think how we start to use information, data, and digital technologies to change our lives today is a key factor. If you look at things of the investments going into like smart cities, IoT, they've been around for years, but they're going to explode, I think, over the next few years. And that creates a couple of problems, particularly from a data perspective, right? So firstly, I think and we spoke about earlier, ESG perspective, you're massively increasing the amount of data, amount of processing, the amount of analytics happening, which is going to have massive impacts on our our carbon footprints and on our global economies and stuff like that. So there's been a ongoing trend over the last few years around, I suppose, easiest way to explain it is edge analytics.
Right.
If you think of a smart car is not sending all of the smart car data back and forth, up and down through the 5G network to the manufacturer or to whatever it is there, right? A lot of the processing of the analytics happens inside the car itself.
Okay.
On the mini computer, right? There's obviously certain critical data it will send and share, but it's not going to do all that. Again, coming back to the Formula One industry, Formula One, I can't remember the exact numbers, but they can only send something like 2 gigabytes of data each time the car passes like the pit box, essentially, right? Or passes the pit lane. They've got limits on the amount of data they can send between the car and through there. But in that those sensors that are passing all the time and driving all the time, there's a lot of analytics that has to happen on the edge, has to happen inside the device, inside the equipment that we're using.
Right.
So I think if you think about the explosion of smart cities and IoT, how do we get some of this large processing data happening on tiny little devices, and actually sustainably, efficiently, and what are the critical assets that need to be communicated across any particular network?
Very interesting.
Yeah, I mean, there's obviously lots of devices out there that have already kind of combated some of this stuff, but how it impacts your business, our business, is the big question, and how do we do that in a ethically sustainable manner?
That's a very big question, Nick. Maybe we could get our heads around it and try and work it out, right? So I'm assuming you're an F1 fan then.
Yes.
You've mentioned it a few times on the call, yeah? Yeah, who's your favourite driver?
I won't answer that quick. No, I am a Mercedes fan.
Okay.
And I am a Hamilton fan.
You're
I think for me,
fan.
but the reason why I'm a Mercedes fan is that they've always tried to innovate. They don't get me wrong. All the teams do amazing work in developing, incredible machines that I think we can only learn from and drive from. But I think if you look through the years, and particularly even when they were on top, the year when they came with the DAS system, they then came with the I can't remember what they called it now, but the removable steering wheel to change the axis. They've came with now with no side pods. Every single time they're pushing, the business is pushing to innovate while maintaining and driving the objectives they want to do. So that talk I mentioned about having, like, you've got your objectives and you need to meet them and grow from them, but where's that growth? Where's that thing that might somehow shift your objective to somewhere else, or move the objective a few inches to the left, because it's using the people inside your business and the collaborative power they have of their mind and experiences and diversity to think of something new, to think of something different. And I think if you look at human progression over the centuries, there's certain things where that diversity coming together and that collaboration has pulled together and said, oh, 1 minute, that's a little bit different to us. It's the same but different, right? It's the same, but it's got one minute difference that actually then changes the world. So that for me is obviously it's a very data heavy sport. So for many it can seem boring watching cars just go round and round and not much change happening in orders and stuff like that. But a lot of it is about strategy. a lot of it is actually about looking at the numbers on a minor scale and seeing minor differences of how they go, and analysing, degradation of tyres, these wind change, these this. So there's lots of data points that go into it. There's lots of strategy that goes into it. And then when you look at it from a business perspective, it's a very unique model that allows us to learn for our businesses of things we can adopt and approach. That's why I suppose I've got a passion for it.
Well, I can tell. So I might chat to you a bit more about F1 in the future. You did mention one big word there, Nick, actually, around diversity. It's a big topic, a challenging topic in our industry, certainly from a skills perspective. F1's very heavily male dominated, let's be honest. What's your view on diversity within the team? What does it mean to you having a diverse team?
So look, I think diversity is and inclusion is, has to continue to be on the top of everyone's agenda. It's something that we have to strive for as human beings, that it's a right, and it's important, I think, on that side. So, but what does that mean in terms of a team? When we spoke about ESG in one of our data leaders exec lounges, the term greenwashing came about, of like basically companies marketing in a way or doing certain tactics that make them seem greener than they actually are. Yes. And I think sometimes there's a risk that we can have, I suppose, diversity washing. I think that diversity is the reason why it's so important, is because it drives better businesses, better performance, and better treatment of humans, right? Yeah. So I think that you need to, not all diversities can be seen. It's not about having physically and visibly men, women, people from different cultures. I think that's important in order to raise awareness and to drive change. But I think when we look at the kind of gender movements recently, if you're seeing a man and a woman in a team, stuff like that, doesn't mean that there's definitely diversity there. In a sense, it could be, they may have people who've had different experiences as well, that creates diversity. So diversity is not always visible, I suppose, is the point there. But diversity is important in you getting it and achieving it. And the reason that is because people have different experiences when they come from different environments and different backgrounds. Yeah. And it's those thought processes that need to enhance and collaborate together to solve proper problems. Yeah. We see this in AI, right? And let's go back to the recruitment industry. IT recruitment industry for years has been white male dominated, probably mid-30s or something like that. So if you try and build an AI model that uses all of the data from all of the different recruitment businesses across an industry in the IT across the UK, the chances are its prediction will tell you, oh, here you go, this white middle-aged man is going to get the job.
Right.
Yeah, because the data tells it that's who gets the job.
Yeah.
Now it's only like that because we've already input subconscious biases into the model because of the history we've developed, right? So I think this is where you need to start thinking about those things and start thinking about, well, 1 minute, if that's going to be the case, we need to balance that out. We need to build a model that will not do that. Yes. And whether that be through, I'm not, as much as I know about data science, I'm not enough to know about the intricacies of it. That's for people we employ to kind of really drive, but at least ask the questions about it. Is okay, how, whether we do weighting or whether you change the data set, or whether you look at different features of the data set to produce different results. That concept needs to go into that. Now, I think that's a very easy one for us to understand. I think there's other sectors and other areas where the bias might not be as obvious. The bias might not be as clear, and it actually takes someone that's come from a different diverse background and from a different culture and from someone with diverse thinking to everyone else,
someone to moderate.
not necessarily moderate, but actually to point out and to question what's going to happen with this model, what the implications are. And look, sometimes that can come down to wording. Right?
Yeah, well, yeah, we know. Yeah, it does actually, doesn't it? And we have to be very, very careful about how we advertise roles and positions out there in the market to make sure that we reach the right audience, etc. And everyone is, on the same. Well, it's a very, very balanced set of communication. Nick, I found this really, really insightful, and I've really enjoyed listening to you, and I'm pretty sure that the listeners are they're gonna get some value from this podcast, which I'm really, really pleased about. Now, I did want to ask you one thing though, actually, before we part company on the call, but can you tell our listeners one thing that they would be surprised to learn about Mr. Nicholas Deveney?
I don't know if surprise is the right word.
Put you on the spot.
It should be surprising on that. No, I think that not necessarily surprising, but interesting. Talking about that diversity piece, I'm very, very passionate about learning, experiencing different cultures and different parts of the world, and seeing what we can gain from that. So I suppose one of my personal facts is I just shy of, but I will be there. Not being very accurate with the data here, but essentially I've been to 20% of the countries in the world.
Wow.
So, yeah, so
that's amazing.
I'm
surprised you've done any work.
I'm probably older than I look, Jez, but that's at least what I say. But no, yeah, it's again that for me, just experiencing and seeing different cultures is a passion, and therefore we, my wife and I try to travel somewhere new, somewhere different on a regular basis to broaden our minds. So yeah,
good on you.
Just a couple short of 20%.
I think that's brilliant. Yeah, I'll maybe on our next chat you can tell me all of the places that you've been. Nick, thank you so much for being on the show today. I think there'll be a lot of value that the listeners will get, as I said. Thanks for your time, and wishing you all the best. And yeah, hopefully we'll get some good feedback, and I'll look forward to catching up with you again soon.
Thank you to you. Thank you to the listeners.
Cheers, Nick. Thank you.